Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the American Parkinson's Disease Association for this episode of Thriving Through Occupational Therapy. I am so happy to introduce our special guest, Sydney Marshman, the founder and occupational therapist with Happy at Home Consulting based in Des Moines, Iowa. Happy at Home Consulting provides therapy at home to older adults, and Sydney works with her team of physical, occupational, and speech therapists. In addition to traditional rehabilitative services, Sydney continues to increase access to home assessments throughout the state. And Happy at Home Consulting presently provides the evidence-based programs HARP through collaborations with community partners. Sydney works alongside builders and interior designers to craft beautiful, functional spaces. She is the president of the Iowa Occupational Therapy Association and advocates for accessible housing through her involvement with multiple state coalitions. Sydney received her doctorate in occupational therapy from Drake University, and in her free time, she enjoys spending time with her husband and two boys. Sydney, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Anushka. Okay, well, let's jump into our session today. We'll be talking about everyday energy strategies, which is a very timely topic, especially with the weather getting a little bit nicer. You may find yourself struggling with that energy management and just the balancing act of day-to-day life. So like Anushka mentioned, I have a private practice called Happy at Home Consulting. We do several things, but I have listed just a handful of things on the screen for you. One of the things that we do is we do serve individuals with Parkinson's as well as care partners through our outpatient therapy in the home services. And that is pretty focused in the Des Moines metro. But I say that because there are other practices like mine. So look for these outpatient in the home providers if you do need those services in your home. We also provide some care navigation services, and those are for individuals across the United States. We partner with different organizations to support their efforts to helping care partners and supporting individuals. And then we do our fair share of home modifications and adaptive equipment consulting as well. So currently we have a partnership with our county housing services, as well as our area agency on aging, to look at some of the ways that we can help people live better, happier lives in their home setting. Some community involvement and just some things that might be applicable for today's session. I was working as an APDA Iowa consultant. It's been a couple of years now, but I was very ingrained in the day-to-day operations of what was happening in our local chapter, and that's made me such a great advocate for APDA Iowa and the great resources that you have available to you through APDA. I also still maintain teaching our Parkinson's Roadmap for Education to Support Services, our press class. We're just finishing up week 7. We have week 8 coming next week, and that is such a fun group to be a part of. Highly encourage you, if you have a press group happening near you, to take advantage of that opportunity. And then specific to what we'll talk about today is energy conservation and energy strategies. So last year I had this great opportunity to participate in an NIH study. And for those of you who maybe aren't aware of what an NIH study is or kind of the weight that holds, is those are actually studies that have been selected for federal funding because of the current need existing in our population, the groups of things that are happening that people would benefit from having more resources and research around specific topics. So my role in that study was to act as a pacing coach. And what that means is I actually got to meet with people individually and talk about what are their energy strategies and how can we help them to improve their day-to-day function. Specific to that study, we were talking a lot about long COVID specifically, but I think that you'll find that a lot of the energy strategies you might have already heard of. They're very commonly used with individuals who have chronic conditions. It's very applicable OT knowledge, things that are kind of our bread and butter, but we definitely can apply them not only to just long COVID populations, but to the Parkinson's population as well. So we'll keep rolling. So this is a little bit of a why focus on energy? Why are we even talking about energy conservation when we have Parkinson's? And one of the really common misunderstood symptoms, non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's, is that persistent fatigue. I know there was a question that was submitted previously about apathy, but this understanding that we just maybe don't have the desire to do something, that's maybe apathy, but fatigue is feeling like you just can't, even though you still want to. So two very different pieces, but sometimes they can get swapped with one another. The other thing is unpredictable reserves. I think you'll find living with Parkinson's that each day is a little bit different. I had someone describe to me that when they wake up in the morning, they know if it's a not necessarily a good or a bad day, but what does their reserve level look like? Are they going to be on today or are they going to be off today? And finding that struggle to balance the physical exercise that we all need to be doing, but particularly those with Parkinson's need to be doing. And how do we pair those with the things that we also have to be doing, like going to doctor's appointments and the things that we have to do, paired with the things that we so badly want to do, things like going to your grandkids' ball games or going to your knitting group or whatever that joyful social outing is. How do we balance all of those things together? And it is common to find yourself just exhausted after these standard household activities, even though they might have been things that you've done routinely for many decades at this point. Things like taking a shower or putting the dishes away. Feeling exhausted after that is one of the pieces that can be normal and it can be brushed off, but what do we do about it? So we'll really talk about that today and talk about the strategies to better understand, manage, and protect our energy as individuals living with Parkinson's disease. So there are some reasons, some actually great background as to why individuals with Parkinson's disease might struggle a little bit more with energy than others. One of the first things are some of the motor symptoms. The physical strain of having Parkinson's disease does increase the energy use that our body needs to just go about our day. That bradykinesia, the slowed movement and the muscle rigidity, means that every physical step that you take requires more energy than it ever has before. Same thing with tremors and dyskinesia. These continuous movements actually do continue to spend energy, just like if you were going to leave your car running, and even though it's sitting in the driveway and it's parked, it's still using gas or it's still using your battery power just sitting in the driveway on versus completely off. And that's really something that we see in the Parkinson's population of people with tremors or that continuous movement do burn a lot more energy than the general public. And then the cognitive overdrive, something that we see pretty often in the PD community is the cognitive load that it takes to make simple decisions, to ask our body to do certain things, even if it's just to take a step. We have to spend so much more brain power thinking through those steps, those sequences, and that can cause a lot of fatigue in our daily activities. So those automated movements like stepping out of the shower, they're not necessarily as smooth and as seamless of a process anymore. We really have to think of, okay, grab this grab bar, big step over, okay, now turn, big step. It's a broken down process that requires that much more energy. So I want to talk about visualizing your energy because I think when we talk about what energy feels like, what it looks like, that can be hard to put into words and to really think about. So the good news is that the good news and the bad news is that energy can't be directly measured or seen by others. There are some obviously signs or symptoms of if your energy is full or low. But then there's not really there's not a battery above our head that says full, needs recharge. That's maybe a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. But we need sometimes this visualization of what does our energy look like. So there's three different frameworks that we'll look at today. The first one is the battery model. We'll look at what does the battery look like. We'll talk about an energy bank or a spoon theory. These aren't necessarily, you have to pick one or the other. One might make more sense to you. You don't necessarily have to juggle all three, but just see what sticks with you today and what maybe resonates with the most. So let's talk about the battery model. Most of us do carry around a smartphone. If you're like me, you have to have that setting turned on that says what percentage of battery that you're at, because my phone always seems to be dying and it always needs charged. I should probably have it charged while I'm sitting here. But there are some days that you wake up and your charger didn't work overnight and your phone's sitting at 15%. And you kind of feel like maybe you can't start your day the way you normally do because your phone has to be on the charger for a good chunk of time. So what are the ways that when you wake up in the morning, do you have a number that you'd give yourself of, gosh, I feel like I'm starting at 80% charged, or wow, I just jumped out of bed today. I'm like 100% charged, ready to go. We have little boys. So, if we were up throughout the night with sick kids, with fussy kids, whatever we were not waking up in the morning with 100% fully charged. We might be waking up with a 75% charge or a 50% charge. And what does that look like for the rest of your day? So some things that we will keep in mind is, what are those high drain apps? I see in the chat that some people already have identified their high drain apps, things like sweeping and mopping multiple rooms in your house. Those things can quickly drain your battery. But what are the things that help recharge your battery? For some people, that's going to be things like spending time with friends. For other people, spending time with others is a battery drainer. So really get to know yourself and what recharges your battery versus what are the things that they take some of your battery power away. What are some of the strategies that we can put into place on how full or drained our battery is? So this next example, similar to the battery, but this is bank accounts and numbers. Some people are not visual, they're more numbers folks. I would say this is a numbers folks reference. So the energy bank account, there are certain things that we do that is an expenditure to our bank account. Those physical tasks like showering, dressing, cooking, the cognitive decisions. Okay, I want to point out the cognitive decisions because theoretically in our day to day, we make these decisions and we don't think about the mental load or the mental fatigue that scheduling an appointment might mean. But when we add some pieces around how are we going to get there, especially if you've given up driving, what's my on time or my off time? Maybe it's better to schedule an appointment in the morning than it is in the afternoon. There's a lot of cognitive power that has to go into some of those basic decisions, things that we've taken a little bit for granted in some ways, that now we're seeing this huge uptick of, gosh, that is just exhausting to think about, just doing this one task like scheduling an appointment. Other environmental factors. Environmental factors are also tricky for similar reasons. There were likely times in your life where certain things didn't bother you, and then one day you woke up and they started to bother you. I'll give you the example. When I was younger, the floral room spray that used to drive my mom batty. We would spray it and it would just give her an instant headache. And I thought, gosh, that is the weirdest thing. I don't know why that bothers you so much, because it seems like we tolerate a little bit more of those stimuli as a small child than we do as an adult. And then one day, probably around the time I graduated grad school, I started getting really bothered by floral scents, specifically things like lavender. And it just quickly zaps my energy to be in a room that has like a lavender scent to it. So, those environmental factors are really things to keep in mind. Not only things like scents, but things like what does your lighting look like? Especially like the harsh white lights that are really common in places like doctor's offices or stores or grocery shopping. Um, is it truly the lighting that's draining some of your energy? And can we modify that, like wearing sunglasses inside or wearing the tinted lenses? There are ways to work around environmental factors, but also it's important to note that maybe having a full battery or a full bank account to better deal with those environmental factors takes a little bit more planning. And then obviously symptoms we've already talked about, though that is a significant energy expenditure or withdrawal. Things that deposit or maybe recharge our bank account, looking at sleep. Sleep is a key factor for all of us, but particularly if you have Parkinson's disease. We'll talk about sleep later in our session today too, but sleep is one of those factors that we really need to look at. How can we improve our sleep and what are we doing about our sleep hygiene? Strategic medication timing. We'll talk a lot about tracking, and medication timing is a really, really big factor in that. We need to minimize our off periods, and sometimes that takes some really fine tuning of our medications and really paying attention to what that medication routine is. Gentle exercise, things that you might do for not necessarily aerobic or that cardio or the weightlifting, things that we really recommend for people with Parkinson's, but even just gentle stretching and making sure that you can fully stretch your body when so many of us are crouched over, we're sitting in our comfy chairs, but being able to fully stretch out and do that restorative movement. Stress management is a huge piece of energy conservation. We don't consider how harmful stress is, and that's something that we need to take a little bit more time to really look internally at. What things, if anything, am I stressed about? Is stress keeping you up at night? There are times that maybe something big is happening the next day and you just don't sleep all night because you're excited or you're nervous or you needed to prep one more thing. And those things can really draw from your bank account. But when you're better able to manage your stress and identify it, sometimes that can help restore that energy. Okay, our last visualization is the spoon theory. The spoon theory is, it's kind of old, it's an older theory, which is wild to say because I don't feel that old. But it is an older theory. It's been around probably for 15 to 20 years. And it started with this conversation, which is so funny to me. A conversation with this gal, Christine, sitting across the table from her friend. And they're talking about, gosh, I just can't do that with my chronic condition. I believe she has lupus. I feel completely zapped. I can't add anything more to my plate. And the friend said, well, what do you mean, Christine? I don't understand. You physically look fine. What's going on? And she said, look, I have 12 spoons and I have already spent 4 of those spoons getting showered. And then I went to the doctor, and that was another 4 spoons. So now I'm down to 4 more spoons. And how am I going to spend those? Is it taking care of my household? Is it sweeping and mopping the floors? Is it going out to dinner with a friend? Is it going grocery shopping, going to a family gathering? Each of the tasks that we do has a different number of spoons allocated. And when we are out of spoons, we are out. We'll talk about with, overdrawing and whatnot, but when we are out of energy, we are out and we will pay for it later. There is no such thing as energy on loan. We do have to pay back our energy loans. And unfortunately, that's kind of a miserable process. but each of the things that we do costs, in this model, it costs spoons. So think about, the things that you're doing in your daily routines, whether that's showering or grocery shopping, cooking. Think about assigning a number to those things, whether it's spoons or the bank account or a battery. It doesn't truly matter. But when we can start assigning a number and really start visualizing, it might make a little bit more sense about where our energy is truly going day to day. So here's the threat of overdrafting. This is something that we talked about pretty, pretty continuously in that NIH study that I was doing. And interesting because we talked a lot about this overdrafting idea, but that wasn't something that I really heard when I was talking about energy conservation in grad school. And we'll talk about some of those strategies, like sitting down when you're doing activities. But we never talked about the repercussions of what happens if you don't. What happens if you just continue your day to day and you just continuously overdraft? We ignore those limits and force past depletion. So the body, we're finding, actually it triggers a protective shutdown. And we can see this for days after that shutdown happens, or even weeks. We're seeing this most often in the long COVID population, but this happens for other people of other chronic conditions as well. So it's really important to look at these patterns, because this time that you're like, wow, I woke up with absolutely 0% battery. I'm so miserable. I can't get out of bed. I can't care for myself today. It might not have been what you did yesterday. It might have been what you did over the weekend or 4 days ago, 5 days ago. It can be significantly delayed, which makes it hard to track. And that's why some of our tracking patterns that we've used historically in adulthood just don't work for what we're needing now. So some examples of what could happen, things like needing longer rest periods, skipping activities, having to cancel things, avoiding exercise, reducing participation, even in the things that you so badly want to do, being frustrated and being angry that you can't do the things that you want to do. And then we see some cognitive pieces too, like difficulty concentrating. So this is where we're really going to talk about becoming an energy detective. So being able to spot your peaks. What are the things that you feel that you have the most energy, and can you allocate them to something in particular? Were you able to see that when I did this to refill my bank account or my battery or my silverware drawer, my spoon drawer, that was really, really helpful. And I should do that more often. And I felt strong. I felt clear headed. I felt stable. What really led to that? And then really look at what are the specific activities that drain your battery rapidly. When do I feel my worst? And what activities do drain me? And don't forget that, yes, you likely will know what activities drain you at that time. I just saw in the chat someone said grocery stores. But it could be several days previously to when you feel that drain. And then remember to log those overdraft triggers. So look backward 24 to 48 hours, even longer if you need to. But what activities are energizing, what activities are incredibly difficult, and really make note of those, and take that information from there. So now we're going to talk about tracking. There's a couple questions in the chat, so I want to get to those really quick before we keep going. I love that people are really, really identifying and really resonating with this material. There's a question about muscle contractions interfering with being able to sleep and strategies for overcoming that. Sleep is one of those pieces that is a really difficult thing to track down, but I always encourage people to talk to the doctor that manages their Parkinson's disease, whether that's a neurologist or a movement disorder specialist, because sometimes it does boil down to looking at medication routines, or if you have like a deep brain stimulator, really looking at how that's programmed. And then there's a couple comments about sometimes the amounts of spoons change. One day, fine running a few errands, and the next day I can only do one. And that's not even including driving. So again, we're looking to build some consistency throughout that. And that's why we're going to look at some of this energy tracking, which it's fine. It's totally fine to have those blips of the days that you have great energy, but how do we even that out throughout the week rather than having some blips and then some dips and working through that? And then there's another comment about how yoga, I believe it's Nidra, has been really helpful. So that is definitely a restorative practice, I would imagine. So we'll go over kind of two main tracks here for our energy tracking strategies. The first one is an analog method. So we're thinking like a simple notebook or a visual kitchen calendar, and you can just write down a daily ranking scale. 1, fully depleted, to 10, vibrant. This can be good for tracking medication, things like feeling on or feeling off. But it would also add in like what activities you're doing that day. And the nice thing about using a calendar is that you probably already have your activities listed there. So it's easier to assign a number to those activities and just how you're feeling for the day. And then some digital methods. There are a ton of digital tech methods happening. So there's definitely specialized tools like the APDA symptom tracker. That's a great way to see symptoms over time and really see what things you're struggling with. And we talked about sleep already, and taking that symptom back to the provider who manages your Parkinson's disease. But really looking at that over time and being able to track the symptoms, even if they only happen maybe one day a week. Sometimes when we get to the doctor, it's so challenging because they're like, how's it going? And you want to say, well, it's great. I'm like exercising, I'm doing things, I'm going to the support group, I'm doing really well. We don't necessarily remember the things that maybe aren't going well. Or we have this desire to be that good patient, like, yeah, I'm doing all the things and I don't need to report on anything that's maybe not going as well. So things like symptom tracking can be really helpful, not only for day-to-day energy management, but also when we go to those checkups and we see our providers to help us kind of coordinate our Parkinson's. Things like smartwatches or the biometric health rings, those are so interesting. There's a lot of different options for different products, and the smartwatches, they seem to come in a range of different options. And I say that because some of them can be more used for dual tasks than others. So think about like a step counter, like something you'd wear on your waist. That's going to count your steps and that's it. There are some things like smartwatches, like I think about, the wrist-based smartwatch that maybe it would tell you when you got a text message in addition to counting your steps, but it wouldn't necessarily read it to you. You couldn't see it from there. It's just kind of basic and boiled down. What I would truly like to see is if people are interested in a smartwatch technology, is find something that works for multiple functions for you. Of maybe it does count your steps, it does track your heart rate, but it also does things like detect a fall if you were to fall. We know that individuals with Parkinson's are more at risk for falls, just in general. Find something that not only fits the things that you'd like to do, but also some of those safety mechanisms as well. Same thing with like the biometric health rings or the jewelry that's coming out. Those are great for looking at heart rates, activity peaks, physical tremors. They can do those things, but there's definitely some limiting factors as they don't have that personal emergency response system built into it. So we're really looking to these digital methods to help us to identify trends and patterns, but we don't want them to generate stress. Remember, stress is definitely a battery drainer. We don't want to generate stress. So if you wake up in the morning and you are stressed that your watch is telling you that you had a poor night of sleep, then that might not be a tool that you want to need or that you want to use or that you need to use. But go into the settings, turn off the things that you don't like to use, and see if that changes your day-to-day function and how much you like using that product versus just using it kind of how it's designed off the shelf. Make sure it's customized to you. So what should you track? The thing is that you can track as many things as you want, but it's all up to your tolerance of how many things do you want to track and can you track consistently. It's also up to your stress level too. I don't want you to be tracking so many things that it's actually stressing you out to remember what to track, to review what you're tracking, and definitely, again, personalize this to what things you want to look at. So things like your energy levels are great things to track and hopefully not too stressful. Sleep is something that can be stressful to people, but can be more easily tracked through things like devices. Medication timing can and also cannot be easy to track. It just kind of depends on the person and what they're using to track it. Things like tremors. There's a couple of new products in the market that I'm not super familiar with that do track tremors, but also just kind of giving those a rating of maybe mild, moderate, significant, because a lot of people also notice that their tremors increase with things like stress and fatigue. So you might notice that there's actually a correlation into how energetic you're feeling and how bad your tremors are. Things like falls or near falls, we really want to look at is your fatigue level, is it changing how safe you are? We don't want you to be experiencing more falls because you're just exhausted. So that's where we're really looking for that average over the week of how do we prevent significant increases in energy and significant dips in energy and just average that out over the week. Things like exercise. Again, everyone with Parkinson's disease should be exercising and doing things that work well for you and your body. But if you are so fatigued that you can't exercise, we need to obviously go back to the drawing board and make a plan of action for what does that look like. Maybe while you're working on your energy, we do something like a seated exercise, or we do a restorative yoga practice, something that we can fit in the routine that's doable. And it now becomes a routine so that when the energy does balance out, we have a planned action. Things like stressful events. And I want to point out that stress isn't necessarily always around bad things. Really great things can be stressful too. Think about wedding planning. Weddings are one of the most joyful days of our lives, but dang, wedding planning is stressful. So there are really good things that can be stressful. And I think it's important to track both of those, the good and the bad. And don't forget that your energy and these symptoms, they might be related to multiple days in advance of those days that you're not feeling like you had great energy. So let's talk a little bit more about energy spend and what that looks like. So like I mentioned, when we were looking at the spoons, everyone has a different spoon allocation on the activity. So there are some activities that are going to take fewer spoons for some people versus other people. Some of that is just personalization and just being individuals. Some of it is a little bit environmental too. So if I think about someone in a ranch house that has no steps to enter, that has their laundry on the main floor, that everything is within, I don't know, 20 steps of one another, their energy spend is going to be much less than someone who lives in a 4-story townhome that has all of their needs on a different level of their house and is doing multiple flights of stairs per day. So energy spend is a very individualized topic, and again points to why we need to be tracking this and really starting to assign different numbers to the energy costs. So these are just some examples, and we'll kind of talk through them here. So things that are I would consider low energy costs. Things like reading a book or listening to an audiobook. I would say that these are generally going to be easy reads. They're not overly stressful. They're not going to give you cliffhangers up the wazoo. They're just easy reads. They might even be, to some people, slightly boring. It kind of depends on the person, but think just easy, moderate read, nothing too serious, nothing too stressful, but just easy. And that's either listening or reading. Things like sitting outside in nature and breathing a breath of fresh air. Again, low energy costs, but obviously could be individualized that if it takes you significant energy to get into nature, to just get out your front door, it might obviously move up to a different level. Things like listening to calm music or meditation tracks also would be a low energy spend. And then we get into this moderate energy cost. So things like simple meal prep, especially if you can do it seated. I thought about the other day when my son and I were peeling potatoes at the kitchen table. I would say that like homemade potatoes go into the high energy cost bin, but just the act of being able to sit down and do that activity, not with any rush, but just to kind of prep those few things at the table seated. We're not managing our balance. We're not worried about being up for a significant period of time, but just that very like simple meal preparation in a seated position. Things like light physical activity, seated yoga, structured stretching, those are all pretty light physical activities. Driving, I can go back and forth of driving as a moderate or a high. I tend to believe that driving is a high energy cost, but I left it here in moderate because for some people it truly is moderate, especially if we're talking about small town driving during off-peak hours. So I'm from a town of about 3,000 people. It's not too busy to get around. I guess I should say that I grew up in a town of 3,000 people. But the times that are difficult to get around are generally things like when school is letting out or when they have a big community activity and they have things rerouted or it's just a little bit busier. But it's maybe a moderate energy cost is that local driving during off-peak hours. High energy costs, I would say for almost everyone, taking a shower, drying off, and getting dressed is a really high energy expend that we don't think about until it's a problem. It's very interesting that this, say, a quote, basic activity of daily living of showering, getting ready for the day, something that we typically do in the morning, is a huge energy expenditure and something that we see people really struggle with for the remainder of their day. These are the days that they generally spend the afternoon at home. They might change their showering schedule to shower specific days of the week that they don't have another event going on, because showering is really significant. But there are things that we can do about showering, whether that's doing a seated shower with a shower chair. Things like installing grab bars can make a huge difference. Laying out your clothes ahead of time, even taking a break in between showering and getting dressed. One of my favorite conversations was this gal who we talked about the idea of just being able to sit in a robe for 15 minutes and dry off before getting dressed. That was life-changing, and just being able to recoup some of that energy lost during a shower. Other high energy costs are things like grocery shopping, particularly during peak hours. So I think of like after work, 5 to 6. Those really busy times can be troublesome for individuals that struggle with energy. And then extended travel, especially when we're talking about complex multi-stop outings, times that you might need a bathroom break. Those are high energy costs, and we really need to be thoughtful of how and when we're plugging those into our schedule. So energy cost is completely individualized. There are a lot of personal and environmental factors, and someone's high energy cost might be your low energy cost or even your moderate. And all of this needs to be taken with a grain of salt until you sit down and look at your own costs, the things that you do throughout your week. What number would you assign it? Does it refresh your battery, or does it spend from your battery? All of those pieces. We cannot forget about sleep. Sleep is your biggest energy deposit. So no pacing strategy, regardless of how good your energy strategies are, how great you have things scheduled out throughout the week. We have to get quality sleep. So looking at overnight wakenings, motor stiffness in bed, or sudden daytime sleepiness, those are things that we really need to be tracking, and we need to be bringing up to our doctor to assess if there's a medication or a different solution for sleep. Sleep disturbances are extremely common in the Parkinson's community. So really looking at what things are you seeing and what things is someone else seeing. Maybe it's not actually something that you observe. Maybe it's your spouse that you share a bed with, but making sure that you have this open communication to discuss these issues and bring them up to your doctor as needed. Sleep schedules are critical. I see a lot of people that struggle sleeping at night because they have a lot of daytime sleep. That's a really hard habit to break, but very important to make sure that you're not sleeping more during the day versus at night. It can be really hard on our bodies and also prevent us from doing some of the things that we love during the daytime hours. So the 4 Ps, we've really talked about these, so I'll just give these to you as kind of a bonus here, but really asking yourself, what is the priority for today, for the week, and really looking at what are the things I have to do and what are the things that I want to do. So when we're looking at how can I spend my energy, we want to be focusing on the things that we have to do ourselves and that we want to do. And I emphasize that we have to do ourselves because there are things that can be delegated or outsourced to someone else. I think about the rise of like ordering groceries, doing grocery pickup. It is easier now than ever before to skip grocery shopping altogether. And if skipping grocery shopping can allow you to attend an exercise class or to go to your grandchild's graduation, then we should definitely look into how to plan for that. Making sure that we have a plan. And again, this really pairs into the cognitive load of this task, but making sure that our activities that are similar are really grouped together. So making sure that we have a plan of all of our dressing tools are there and they're in the same place. All of our clothes are ready for us after we shower, that we have all the ingredients that we need to make a meal, that we really went through this process to group things together before we get started. And then pacing. Pacing is really tricky, particularly those that have a new chronic condition, because there's been a large majority in our life where we did not need to pace, that we just did things as they came up. We did them as fast or as slow as we wanted to, but we haven't really considered that at this point in life, we need these small strategic rest breaks, and we need to take part in them before we've reached that physical exhaustion, and before we've reached the point of no return or that boom bust cycle. And then position. We talk a lot about this in home mods, but really making sure that the way our house is set up makes sense for us, that we're not having our frequently used items too far above or below us, that we're seated comfortably, that we have a nice chair to get in and out of, that we have grab bars that support us when we need them, that we're really looking at our home as an ergonomic workplace where majority of our life happens. So some quick kind of adaptive tools, things like shower chairs, grab bars, long-handled reachers or shoe horns, rolling carts are all great solutions to help you work smarter, not harder. Things like voice-activated smart home commands and automated timers can make a huge difference for reducing some steps in your home. So in our home, we have Google. I'm able to tell Google to turn our lights on and off, And that's really nice for when we're either leaving the house or we're going upstairs to bed of Google, turn all of our lights off, and it'll turn all the lights that, the majority of the lights off in our home. And that can reduce not only our house's energy spend, but walking across to all the lamps throughout the room. And we can't forget about exercise. Exercise still matters even when you struggle with energy, but protecting your movement, making sure that you're still able to exercise because exercise does delay your disease process. It does keep you living with Parkinson's better, longer. And that's what one of the reasons it's so important to better track our energy and to start building some of those scheduling, planning, prioritizing functions earlier than later. This is a pretty large chart, but just to kind of quickly go over these kind of low, moderate, high-tech solutions. So we really talked about the high-tech solutions like the smartwatches, the smart rings, that moderate tech of the APDA symptom tracker for a smartphone versus doing like a paper journal and a printable calendar. And then same thing for medication reminders. There are tons of smart alarms, automatic dispensers, but also the basic pill organizer works just as well too, depending on your needs and what your day-to-day looks like. Safety and fall detection, again, I really, really stress that get multiple purposes out of the devices that you're purchasing. Make sure that they're not just a step counter, they're not just for heart rate, that they truly can function in the event of a fall or an emergency. So, a little bit just in closing, understand your energy, track your patterns, start protecting those important energy deposits so you can do the things that you want to do. Reduce the unnecessary energy expenditures, see where you can save time and energy, and save those activities, save your energy for the activities that matter most. So now we'll move over to some questions and answers. You are more than welcome to send me an email listed there. Otherwise, I think we had some pre-submitted questions and maybe a few more questions in the chat, Anushka.
Sydney, thank you for that wonderfully informative presentation. And the first question I want to bring forward to you is, do you have any advice for how people can handle their household chores and home maintenance? As you mentioned earlier, someone in the chat, Valerie, said sweeping and mopping 3 rooms recently just knocked her out for the rest of the day. So what advice do you have for those household tasks like sweeping, mopping, cleaning,
Yeah.
etc.?
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that I don't have Parkinson's myself, but I have 2 little boys. So I fully understand the challenges of managing your house and doing so without depleting your energy. Some things that we've explored in our household that I think could be applicable are things that breaking those big things down to little bits. Do you have to do all 3 rooms on the same day? Maybe yes, maybe no. Could you do 1 room a day rather than all 3? Could you invest in something like the smart sweepers, a robot vacuum? They even have the vacuum and the mop built into them now. We've had great success switching over to a lighter weight vacuum. So, there's the big vacuums that need plugged in. We've had a lot of people switch to the rechargeable battery operated options that are still the long stick vacuum. So it's not bending over as much, but the lightweight really cuts down on the energy expenditure. And then the last thing when it comes to vacuums, who know I'm so passionate about vacuums, is that the handheld vacs have been really helpful for just those kind of day-to-day crumbs and messes.
Thank you. And this question is from Susan. And you touched on this a little bit towards the end of the presentation, so maybe if you can go into a little bit more detail, but can you just talk about how people can balance the need to get a lot of exercise for managing their Parkinson's with the advice to use energy saving strategies?
Yeah, so I do think when you read that, they do sound conflicting. It's confusing. Exercise a lot, do really vigorous exercise, but also save your energy. And how do you do both? That's challenging, but I think what we really need to press into is that exercise for individuals with Parkinson's needs to be viewed as a have to have. It's yes, it's absolutely a want, but it's a must. It is as much part of our medication routine as the medications in your pill planner. So it's tricky to balance both of them. And I think that's where some of the tracking really comes in handy. Being from Iowa, we have a huge state fair, right? So we have a lot of walking that needs to happen at the state fair. When we look at our energy planner, so to speak, maybe we plan our energy spend around some of those social events that might naturally replace exercise because they have that similar spend. And then we can reschedule some of the want to do, have to do activities around that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And you had mentioned, thinking of exercise as like medication. And
Mm-hmm.
we have a question about how do Parkinson's medications affect people's energy levels?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what medications you're using. And it really, as an occupational therapist, I know enough to be dangerous about medications, but I really want to point people back to discussing with both the prescriber of their medications and also their pharmacist. A lot of people don't know that they typically have access to a medication review as part of their Medicare benefit, and they can have a pharmacist review all of their medication across prescribers to see, is my fatigue actually coming from my combination of medications, or is this medication no longer serving me? So really having that conversation not only with your prescribers but also with someone like a pharmacist who can look at that list in a holistic view.
Great, thank you. And early in the presentation, you talked about the cognitive load that can
Mm-hmm.
impact people's energy level.
Yeah.
The question is, as a person living with Parkinson's who lives alone, how can I lighten my cognitive load?
Sure, that's a great question. And it's tricky. It's tricky to live alone and wonder how to lighten your cognitive load when you are wholly responsible for all things that are happening. But I think that goes back to some of the things that we typically recommend for someone living with Parkinson's, but really anyone, which is we need to build community. We need to build community not only with our family, but also with friends, with other neighbors, with the people who are just naturally in our social circles. And that can happen through things like attending a support group or attending an annual conference, but it can also happen just through general community events. And outside of those social supports, we also need to look at those, professional supports as well. Maybe if you are what we would call a solo ager, someone aging into individual as an individual without a solid support group, maybe we do look into finding those professional supports earlier than later. Things like maybe having a geriatric care manager or someone who can help with the scheduling and appointments and tracking all of those pieces of the cognitive load. Maybe we look into having some support at home, whether that's a housekeeper or someone to help with showers. But what are those professional supports that can fill in the gaps if the social supports aren't enough?
Thank you for answering that. I know a lot of people in our APDN network do live alone, so that is
Mm-hmm.
super helpful advice. So you mentioned, building community and building support. And for the introverts out here who, you know, really staying socially engaged is important and
Mm-hmm.
having that social connection is important. But how can introverts sort of manage that balancing act between staying social, staying engaged, but also mindful of their energy? Do you have advice for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to that ongoing conversation about energy spend. Like we talked about, certain things for some people might be rejuvenating, and some things might be expenditures. And when we talk about social experiences, typically people go one way or the other. So for people who are really rejuvenated by social experiences, they're probably going to include those social experiences as part of their times of rest in ways that they recharge their battery. That feels very odd to the rest of us that are very socially drained from experiences. So they're not incorporated in that rest and relaxation time period. They're actually included as more of like the activity of the day. Maybe going to the support group is the most that we can do that day because it is tricky to get dressed, to get out the door, to find the event, to attend the event, and that is it. That's done. So think about, are there other ways that you can be engaged in build community that don't necessarily spend your energy as much? For example, in Iowa, they're doing strictly social events. Those are, I would say, much more palatable for people who are drained by social events because they're not adding in that education aspect. It's just a social event. There's no agenda. It's just come as you are versus sometimes balancing the social and the education in addition to our daily routines is tricky.
Absolutely. Great advice. And we have a few minutes left, so I'll just present one final question, kind of tying into that chart that you showed us of high
Yeah.
energy cost and low energy cost activities. Do you recommend that people with Parkinson's think about doing high energy cost things in the morning when their fatigue may be lower?
Hmm.
Or should they consider doing it later in the day after medication has kicked in and maybe after they feel more fully awake?
I think that is such a personal question. And I think it relates a lot back to how we are as people before Parkinson's. Are you a morning person that you naturally wake up at 5 a.m., rejuvenated, refreshed, ready to start the day? Or are you more of an afternoon person? I find my best times are after 3 p.m. in the afternoon. That's when I feel that my brain is finally turned on for the day, that I can sit and focus and get a few things done. And for some people, that's not the case. Maybe they're a morning person or a night owl and really looking at how do we schedule time or activities around those pieces and how do we maybe stray from that preference on the things that we can't change, things like church or regularly scheduled events that we maybe don't have control over changing.
Thank you. And our final comment here is from Susan. Susan just wanted to say, thank you for a talk that helped normalize many things that I experience. Just feeling that I shouldn't be tired from some things took a lot of energy. And someone else did say it's validating to hear that exhaustion after what I used to consider easy things is a real thing. So I think that you really spoke to a lot of people's concerns around energy today. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, on behalf of APDA, thank you all so much for joining this program today. Thank you to Sydney for presenting. And we invite you to join us at our next episode of Thriving Through Occupational Therapy on July 9th, which will be presented by occupational therapist Sydney Settle, our program director, or I'm sorry, program coordinator at the APDA Missouri chapter. So once again, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Hi, I'm Leslie Chambers, the President and CEO of the American Parkinson Disease Association. Each month across the country, APDA is providing support groups, exercise classes, and educational programs like this one to support the Parkinson's disease community. You can find all of our upcoming virtual events on our website at apdaparkinson.org/events. If you enjoyed today's broadcast, I hope you will consider making a donation to help keep programs like this possible. Your gift can help APDA support people living with PD through local programs, reliable resources, and groundbreaking research designed to find treatments and ultimately the cure for Parkinson's disease. Please donate today at apdaparkinson.org/donate. And thank you so much for your support.